The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or to view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
Coordinated from me. I still interestingly missed the interval going from the end of 27 to the beginning of 28. Ordinarily, I'm not in such a huge hurry to divulge all my mistakes to people who see me perform. However, I think in this case it's germane. There was a wonderful comment that a colleague of yours, whose name, forgive me, I can't remember, the very first time I did this class with you, there were, I think, only 3 people or something. There was anyway. It was another composition professor, and I was having trouble parsing out what looked on paper to be a very simple melody, but it was awkwardly written. It was there were funny intervals and strange jumps on unusual syllables, and the student composer, it should be said, was becoming annoyed with me for missing it repeatedly. And then her professor raised his hand and very tactfully said, "Well, take an experienced musician and an awkward line of music, and you can't expect it to be much smoother than that at first gloss." And it was a very telling comment. And it's an incredibly ephemeral concept in that, you know, what does a smooth or logical or organic melody mean to each of us? And it depends also on what compositional idiom you're working in. You know, something like this that owes so much to the tradition of, say, German art song, or let's say basically art song from the mid-19th century. There are certain standards standards isn't the word I want. There are certain conventions in the way melodies will unfold that we all kind of accept and listen for. And for some reason, I think it has largely to do with where you're going harmonically. That interval is hard for me to hear, the C to F. It's an open fifth. It's the easiest interval you could possibly sing. Nonetheless, because harmonically it's heading in a direction that doesn't necessarily make that much sense in regard to what has preceded it, it feels a little bit awkward. Now, I understand where you're wanting to wind up, and that does make sense sort of on paper, but at the same time, you've embedded us so deeply in this new harmonic area. If you really want to get back to the home key, it seems to me that the song should happen in 3 episodes. One being the initial statement rather, in the home key area, then your trip to whatever relative key area you wish to go, and then some sort of vocal resolution that brings us back to the home area. Now, again, this is, I'm talking strictly in terms of that kind of convention of 19th century art song. This whole idea of symmetry, which of course, has been in existence long before that period. But I think just for the sense of going back to the home key area, you need to give the singer a little bit more and not just sort of let the piano take care of it. There is, of course, I don't know how much Schumann you've listened to, the art song of Robert Schumann. Obviously, right and left, he does this very odd thing for those of you who have not listened to a lot of Schumann. Schumann is famous for writing these magnificent songs and then tacking on these seemingly unrelated postludes that go on sometimes for minutes. There's a famous song cycle of his, Frauen lieben und leben, where the last song, the singer has just poured out her heart in this, terribly wrenching way, that her husband has died and she will bury herself, within her own heart and never be revealed again. Very dark ending. She finishes the song and then he sort of gives us a little leading chord and then goes off on this gorgeous little piano sonata all by himself. And the singer just sort of stands there. And the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, thanks a lot. That's really handy. So I think it can work in very specific contexts. I mean, it's hard not to stand there and feel like you have egg on your face. But unless you parse out the idea of the key that you want to end up in more thoroughly, I say either elongate your postlude, have it make more of a statement about what has preceded, so it gives balance at the end of the song to what has happened at the front end. Because the front end is very strong. You have this very emotional, it reminds me a little bit of Erlkönig of Schubert, which I'm sure you've listened to, where we have a distinct voice of a character and then a distinct voice of a narrator. So you've given us this nice thing, but then we're sort of missing the denouement, we're sort of missing the last step. Now, obviously there's no more text in the poem, you're all fresh out, but I guess that's the one thing that is sort of missing to me, an overall sense of balance to the song. In terms of how it sings, in terms of how it feels in the voice, it's very nicely written in terms of vocal line. A typical trap that young composers often fall into, including ones who really should know better because they're earning their money being composers, is to either be far too conservative with the voice and just sort of out of fear of demanding too much, or just going completely off the deep end and having, making demands of the singer that are just not vocally appropriate for the person's Fach or voice categorization. And you've done a good job of sort of having one foot in each camp, having the bulk of the melody sitting in a very comfortable sort of middle range and allowing it to arc up and down to make certain dramatic statements, which I think is really clever and difficult to do as well. So kudos to you for that. Daniel, forgive me if I natter on for a couple seconds longer. With regard to the score itself, there's one particularly strange thing, and Peter, you need to put in your 2 cents here, but it's measure 20. It's a very awkward way of notating that rhythm, if that's indeed the rhythm that you intended. It comes out is, the night was dark, no father was there. It was kind of if I were to recite it with a rhythm that made the most sense to me in context of the speech, I would have probably said, the night was dark, no father was there. In other words, back the whole thing up by an 8th note. The way it's written there, in 6/8, we're looking for certain visual groupings on the page. And to give us, the quarter note makes sense, it's nothing fancy, but what trips up the eye is the dotted 8th tied to the 16th tied to the 2 additional 8ths, if you see what I mean. That looks odd on the page, and it makes, if we're thinking in 6/8, we're not necessarily going to parse that out as a sudden feel of 3/4, because that's not, the 3/4 pulse is not something that we're feeling uniformly throughout this section. Do you see what I'm talking about? Yeah. I'm not sure I'm articulating it as clearly as a composer would, but I say either, if you want to stick to that rhythm, then see if you can find a different way of notating it with tied notes. Tied notes seem fussy and weird, but actually visually, they can make the language much clearer to the eye when looking at it. My only suggestion in my own, what am I trying to say? in support of my other suggestion, which is shifting it up slightly, like moving it back by an eighth note, would be to give a truer sense of the shape of the text. This comes out feeling like, no father was there. I'm not sure if you mean no father was there, or no father was there. You need to make up your mind which is the important word in there, because the way you said it, it falls in neither camp. Do you see what I mean? I'm trying to think if I had any other ideas with regard to the score. I didn't. Daniel, would you please feel free?
I'll say a couple of things. First, that I appreciate a lot of the articulation that you've given this piano part. But one difficult thing about this piece is when there are different articulations in each hand. And it's something that certainly as a pianist you come across, but it's always a very specific thing that a composer is going for when a pianist is asked to do such separate articulations in the hands. And even, I don't know if you noticed in 24, I think the second time we did it, I played the right hand legato and I played the left hand staccato. I reversed the articulations. And I guess I'm only mentioning this to say, be careful when you do that, because it makes such a strong impression on me to see that on the page. But I agree that the end feels a little lopsided in favor of the front of the piece, and that if you do get a chance to expand on the end, I love measure 8 when that hemiola rhythm comes in my part, this. And I was kind of waiting for that to come back at the end. And I know you don't have the same text to work with, but it's such a memorable moment that if that kind of gesture were to come back at the end, it would give us that sense of return and solidifying, the home key and all of that. No, very, very nice part to play.
I wanted to extrapolate briefly on the points Daniel made about articulation, which are really, really, really well put. One thing that I have found, frequently, is often what makes differences in articulation really work, or what gives tension to a piece, is if the entire piano part has one texture and the voice is asked to use a different texture. I can think of 100 different examples. Of course, now I can't. Oh, there's a piece, probably one of many, called Ständchen of Schubert, where the piano is really imitating the plucking of a mandolin. It's like, and the voice is this sort of fabulous, sort of honeyed, soaring, gorgeous thing. But it's the contrast between, if the piano was all and the voice was doing that, it would sound like a big muddy mess. But because it's juxtaposed, dry against wet, pretty good way of putting it, somehow it just makes the song come to life. It makes it so romantic and so evocative. Suddenly you hear precisely what is intended. You've got such a strong sense of this sort of like brooding picture that the poem delineates. I think that you can work using articulation specifically between the voice part and the piano part, or dynamics, or whatever it may be, to heighten that and make it more specific. I also thought of one other thing that I wanted to mention, which is, and again, this has a lot to do with the convention of 19th century song, which your composition seems to owe a good deal to. And that is not a terribly strong feeling of cadence at the end. And I'm not saying that it has to be that way. Of course it doesn't. It's always one's individual choice. But if you're working within this harmonic language, unless you're going to do something that is very specifically moving away from that tradition, in other words, paying tribute to that tradition of vocal and piano writing, yet putting your own imprimatur on it, I think it needs to be more specific and clearly articulated than sort of a cadence that kind of hints at something a little bit more abstract but doesn't really deliver the goods. So again, it all gets back to the idea of giving the piece more balance, giving it a little something on the end to weigh it down, if that makes sense.
For the piano part, purposely didn't want to have strong cadence because I wanted to go back to text painting for the vapor flu part. But yeah, I agree, I should expand more upon.
If that's the intent, then there's a good deal more you can do to help push your pianist in that direction. And again, you can feel free to interrupt me, but I would suggest marking your ritardando earlier and marking dynamics for sure with actual words, or like morendo, or I don't know, just find the right combination of words and diacritical markings to indicate that you're looking for a very specific sort of ephemeral, vanishing, vaporous effect. Because here, looking at it, it looks like you want the same thing in all four measures and a little bit of slowing down and a little bit quiet in the last measure, when in fact, the effect you're going for will demand a lot more of something, of decrescendo or lightness of touch or more pedal or less pedal or something. But whatever it is, don't be afraid to be specific. Daniel made a great comment at the beginning, which is that a well-marked piece, I mean, it may seem fiddly and fussy to go in, finale or Sibelius, whatever, and put in all those stupid things, pedal, articulations. We love that kind of thing. That's where we sort of live and die as performers. I mean, I love having, a piece by, I don't know, name your favorite 17th century composer, where there are no diacritical markings at all, because, you get to make up your own mind about things. But what I particularly love is a composer like Benjamin Britten, where everything is incredibly specific, and he was notorious for being so didactic and really irritating with his publishers. He'd be like, "No, you've left the rest out. Throw them away, print it again." So the more specific you can be, the stronger impression you give us of what you intend. So in other words, if there aren't enough diacritical markings, it seems to us like you haven't made up your mind. And yet, you're telling me that you have a very specific thing in mind. So let that be expressed on the page. So, Peter, what would you like to do? Shall we move on?
Move on, yeah.
All right, good. That's very beautiful, Stephanie. Nice job. Round of applause for the composer.